I'm a senior project manager with RPI, and I've specialized on it really in our HCM space. So I work with Melissa and her team a lot. And, because a lot of our workforce already does work remotely, we're fairly comfortable with virtually managing projects here. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis. But let me say, even with that, everything is really different now. I was sitting here looking, and you're seeing me in my background, but on my right side, I have a fire truck. And on my left side, I have first grade math homework. So, this is the reality of the world we're working in. And I'm hoping to share with you today some tips and tricks from things that we've incorporated to our projects overall, just in general, but also talk a little specifically about what we're finding works well given the current circumstances of our world today. So, Melissa, I don't know if you want to do a quick intro and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. I'm Melissa Olson. I'm the HCM practice director. Background, 8 years with RPI. I was about the only HCM consultant back 8 years ago. So, we've really been able to grow quite a large team in the last few years. And before that, I was a Lawson programmer and HRIS analyst or manager. So I've kind of gone through a lot of the roles, so technical roles and functional roles before moving into consulting. So, the last presentation I did with Jonathan on your Go Live one, stepping into the shoes of the client or, an executive that's a project sponsor, I'm very comfortable with understanding the pain points because, I met with them or I've been them and I understand, kind of where you're going through, what you guys have gone through, no matter what function you're in. And Theresa, I was kind of, whoever was here a little early, just talking through how it is different even for us that are used to working remotely. We're not used to running SITs, Go Lives, UATs remotely, and we're also not used to our teams, that our project partner teams, being remote. So we've learned quite a bit in the last 2.5 months, and we're here to hopefully help usher you into this new brave world and keep you efficient. And because the things you do today in person do not work. We've tried and failed a couple of times on trying to keep, anything from statuses, meetings, even the tools that we used to use don't work the same. So let's go ahead and enough teasing.
So as I was thinking about what it looks like today, managing projects in a virtual world, I kept thinking of this phrase from one of my travels when I was in London. And if you've ever been there and been on the tube, then you are well acquainted with the phrase "mind the gap," because there are signs for it, and it plays over and over and over across the speakers and anytime a train is approaching the platform. And the reason why is some of the train platforms are very curved, while obviously these subway trains are just stick straight. And so that leaves you with some really unsafe spaces between where the train is and where the platform stops. And to put it plainly, they're not a perfect fit. So when riders are left with this warning to watch their step and pay close attention to where that platform ends and where the train begins. And I really have felt like these last few months, many of us are kind of in this similar situation. We're stepping off a platform of familiarity. We're stepping onto this high-speed train of change. And the fact of the matter is that it's just not a perfect fit. And we find ourselves with this strange gap between how we used to live and work and the way we're doing it now. And I think we're all aware that wherever things go in the next few months, we're never going back to that same platform. Things are changing, things are moving, and we're all getting on the train. So the important thing is, what do we do with this? Where do we go from here? And how do we cross that threshold without tripping or without losing some of our fellow passengers, those team members that we need to help us get these projects completed successfully? And what does it look like to mind that gap between working together and working together now apart? So I want to start talking through how you structure. What we're finding works well in terms of structuring a virtual project. And the first thing that I would do is I take a step back, but I think really small. So it's harder to manage on the large scale when everyone is so disconnected, when we're all working so separately. And so, what I'm finding works well is to divide the work into very measurable daily goals. Think in terms of sprints, not in terms of large milestones and phases. And be flexible with those. Be willing to, determine that something isn't working or you need to move things from day to day. Something I've been doing with my teams, especially as we're in phases of the project where there's a ton of work that needs to happen pretty quickly, is I'm doing beginning of the day kickoffs and end of the day wrap ups. And one thing that I found that works really well is to not wait until the very end of the day to do that wrap up, but rather to do it about an hour before the day is done so that we have time to say, oh, wait, we have all these goals we didn't achieve today. Let's pull together and, work an extra hour tonight to get them done. Or we have all these goals we still need to accomplish. Let's move some of these to tomorrow. We need to reassess where things are. And that goes back to that willingness to be flexible. And reassess where things are. What does the team need? Can we move things around? Do we press on? Do we press pause? Those are the kind of questions that I ask in those wrap-up meetings.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is while you have your office, people still have their day-to-day jobs. There are still emergencies that are going to happen. So at the beginning of the day, you expect to get X, Y, and Z done, and then all of a sudden some work comes in and you either aren't able to test or get as far as you need to, and other people are kind of waiting on either your progress or actually waiting for you to complete something that day so they can begin their task. So again, that flexibility is pretty huge. And we're even seeing it with a project that went on pause because of COVID response. The team is still trying to do some work where they can. And these daily, we didn't think we needed daily status because, the project's on pause and we're, we're stepping back a little bit and we're just kind of there when they need us, but there are still tasks that they're doing. And we found, even to have a daily status, so everyone is on the same page of who's responsible for what task and when it should be done is still working. So if you're finding some of your projects are in that kind of neverland and you're not sure if they're going forward and nobody's really said anything, bring these daily statuses up, say, hey, look, today this is what I accomplished for this project. I know that our go live is probably not the same as it was before, or we may not even have a go live anymore, but I want everybody to know that this is still occurring and nothing happens. You still put out a daily status that nothing occurred that day.
Mm-hmm. And I think an important thing to keep in mind as we are managing teams that are trying to keep projects moving in this time is that we want to be pressing forward. We want to see progress. We don't want to be at that standstill, but we have to be careful to do that without pushing, right? We don't want to shove a passenger onto the train and have them miss and trip over the gap between the train and the platform. So keeping that pressure and forward movement without pushing is key. And some things that we've been implementing with our teams to help that happen is to make sure that we have time limits for tasks. So this isn't just about that goal of this is all we want to accomplish today. This is also something that gives us an indicator of there's a problem, things are going awry. If we're spending days on a task that was only supposed to take a couple hours, then this is an indication that maybe that team member needs some assistance. And in those cases, I really encourage my team members to just walk away, push pause, walk away from it, maybe come back in another day or two with fresh eyes. Things might look really different, or hand it off to someone else. Maybe you don't have bandwidth to work on this right now. This goes back to that flexibility too, and cultivating that flexibility among your team. This isn't the time to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing our heads up against a wall. This is the time to take that step back. And if something isn't working, don't push through right now. Just take a break, take a pause, and come back to it later. we also use those goals to help us identify issues. It's important to have that monitoring and that tracking to make sure that our team isn't just spinning their wheels, which is harder to keep track of, right? When we're not all sitting together, it's harder to know if a team member is off working on something that they should have been done with a few days ago. So these time limits, these check-ins, they give you the opportunity to reassess.
And we found that to be an SIT remotely. Generally, when you have, and that's system integrated tests. So generally, when you have a testing phase with a partner on these big projects, everybody's on site, they're all in a room, they're all concentrating on the scripts, and they decide, they've got to back up for their regular work so they can just be heads down for the 8 hours or however long their partner is there working with them. And we found that didn't work remotely with the camera on because, like Theresa was saying, there's homework, there's children at home, there's other things that are going on, appointments that they may have to get out to. They may have a sick family member. So to be flexible and to say, okay, let's work 2 hours, let's get some testing, we'll break, we'll reconvene. So you have that schedule early on, and okay, I've got this 2 hours of breaks during my day. Let me schedule what I need to, during this time.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Melissa said, what we're finding, especially on testing, is working these projects 100% remotely. We have to really, really nail down these roles and responsibilities, and even things that, when you were working together were assumed. They don't happen organically when you're not in the same room. So if you haven't already, make sure that you're assigning really specific project roles and responsibilities. Even for things like meetings, who takes the minutes? Who is responsible for managing the slide deck? Who leads the discussions? Going to that level and assigning a leader to each agenda item, we're finding is critical in these remote sessions. In person, some of these roles just sort of happen, and it is really tough when you have the gap that's established between webcams. So that's a really important aspect. We thought it would also be helpful to talk a little bit about what not to do. So Melissa's been talking about those in-person projects, but it is different. Everything is different. Timelines are different. You got to increase the regimen and the structure if you're doing a project virtually. I don't know, Melissa, if you have other specific things that you're seeing that we need to incorporate to these virtual projects that are different from in person.
It's just, and it's the core of every single interaction with people is the communication, the over communication. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that more, but whenever there's a misstep, we always find it goes back to that communication piece and not, letting everybody know. So we, what's worked out really well for a couple of our teams is creating group chats on Teams specifically for that client. So no matter if you have, like maybe we're having a discussion that's not technical, but we still have our tech lead on there. If he wants to read it, he can read it. You never know what might trigger something that he might be working on that might affect the work. So same thing internally. You might think to leave people out of group emails or chats because you don't think it has anything to do with them, but just keep everybody apprised of everything that's going on because, things get missed a lot easier remotely.
Yeah. Yep. And also just a friendly reminder on your virtual conference calls, don't forget to mute and unmute. We've all heard the stories about awkward things that have happened because someone thought they were on mute and they're not. This is the time to pay extra careful attention to that. And me personally, I'm pretty good at muting. I am not good at unmuting. So the advantage of video calls is that you could see my lips moving and someone will get on and go, Theresa, you're on mute. And I can have the cue to unmute it. But just a friendly reminder, that's definitely something we're all adjusting to in this new world. So a couple of key items, just some quick tips for minding that gap in your projects are, I'm finding it really helps to turn up the amount of times I reference someone by name. Once again, a large part of what we're doing managing projects remotely is just trying to bridge a gap between where we are and make that connection to the person on the other end of the line. And that's not as easy to do over a webcam or over a call. And so I try to use every opportunity I can to increase that connection. And one really good way of doing that is using the person's name. We also are having to really slow down everything. And this isn't just referring to presentations and how we're talking, it's also the projects themselves. An aggressive schedule doesn't mesh well with a virtual project. It's tougher. So be prepared to slow down if you need to. Slow down test cycles, slow down training. Also, I really encourage everyone to ask questions, and right alongside that is embracing silence. We tend to want to fill silence on conference calls, and obviously we don't just want to sit there for 2 minutes with no one saying anything, but people need that break and that silence to process thoughts, to come up with questions, to ask questions. And so allow silence to happen. Don't be afraid of leaving the line just open for a minute. I'm also finding that I need to repeat over and over again, clarify my message, repeat it in different ways. And this goes back to what Melissa was saying about communication. In virtual projects, it is almost impossible to over communicate. So I'm finding, we cover things on a call. I follow up with an email. I maybe follow up with it in notes in my next meeting minutes or in the agenda as we're preparing for the following meeting. It's very difficult to over communicate. It's taking longer for people to absorb the information. And also take breaks. Melissa talked about testing a little bit, and what we're finding, if in a typical project, we would be on site for these test cycles, and we would do those 8-hour-long days of all of us in a room, and that is it's not feasible remotely. First of all, being on a webcam is far more exhausting than just being in a room together. And so we're finding that we have to do bite-sized chunks. I'm coming off of a test cycle right now where we structured it with a kickoff and a wrap-up, but in the middle, we just had two 2-hour test sessions every day. And we were able to cover everything we needed to cover with occasional homework assignments for the team, but that was about all the team could handle at one time. It's a different level of intensity trying to work these projects virtually. I don't know, Melissa, do you have any other thoughts on minding those gaps?
Yeah, just back on the silence one, and you guys have probably noticed this on calls or been that person on a call where you want to say something, but you don't want to either sound stupid or sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Like, did I miss something that everybody else got? So you don't say something, or you, like Theresa was saying, you have that idea, but it's just not formulating quick enough. That's where that silence, I found it on all my meetings, my team meetings especially, is just giving them space, and then stuff starts coming out. And it's got to be a safe space where people, feel like they can say something and they won't be judged, and they won't, they feel they can trust their team to just bring up whatever. And again, I find that having communications outside those calls help with that. The chats, you share goofy jokes or memes or whatever outside of that to kind of break that communication barrier. So when you are on something and you don't feel comfortable, that you trust the people around you that you can bring it up.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, we have found some tools that work really well for communicating over these distances. So what I'm trying to do on my projects is leverage tools for instant connection as much as possible. So think of those sort of work-based social media tools like Teams or Slack, Jive, Yammer are some other examples. The ability for people to just have that live chat going back and forth seems to get about as close as we can to the in-person collaboration that happens when you're all in a room together. Also, I'm finding I have to be even more intentional with who is attending my meetings and how I run them. So in a project where we're able to meet more in person, it doesn't necessarily matter as much if I have a lot of extra participants in the room. In fact, oftentimes I would have advised, like, we need as many people there as possible. You want to have, if it's going to touch them, you want them to have say in what you have what you have going on. Yeah. I know I don't have that advice for a virtual project. You know, there are personalities that are going to dominate conversations no matter what forum they're in. And in the virtual environment, it's even more difficult to manage that and make sure that those stakeholders who really need to have a say are getting room and feel comfortable speaking out. So I try to be really careful and think through who needs to be there, slim down that participant list to just those people, and then also be really careful about meeting time. I'm finding myself thinking through my agendas a lot more carefully, making sure that I'm scheduling people who maybe only need to be at part of the meeting at the very beginning and all their items together so that we can dismiss people partway through and they're not stuck sitting on a web call that they don't have to be there for. So I'm finding myself adjusting my time and being more aware of who's participating in different meetings and the way that we're communicating in that time.
I don't have much else on that one because we've talked about that. And we've talked about that even before when it was not virtual. We still had some of those where there were too many cooks in the kitchen and you're not sure which is the one that you should be listening to. So yeah.
Yeah. So as far as managing meetings, what we're finding is it works well to kind of chunk out your project time. When you're doing this virtually, try to keep things as consistent as you can for those same time periods of the day, so that as people are mapping out their day, they're able to know, 9 to 11. That's typically GHR project time. That seems to work really well. And when you do schedule meetings, it helps to communicate that as early as possible and also send out agendas ahead of the meeting. If you aren't already doing that, now is the time for sure to adopt that practice and get that out there so that people can come prepared. Definitely time management looks really different in this world. And it's good to be clear about your purpose and the goal and the outcome. I like to create a goal and a desired outcome for every meeting. I put it in the invitation of the meeting itself so people know what they're coming to. I also state it at the start of the call so that people are reminded of what we're discussing, what's to be expected. This is also the time to, if you're not already sending out meeting minutes, it's nearly impossible to over communicate. And this gives you that opportunity to reiterate the discussions of the meeting, to highlight the decisions that the teams made. And I like to send them out within 24 hours. I think that's a good goal because it'll still be fresh enough in everyone's mind that if there are modifications or if anyone has a correction, they'll remember and be able to send them to you, and you can get that revised and sent back out. And I also like to call out, it's a great way to call out those follow-up items so that you don't find yourself waiting for the next meeting and all of a sudden someone goes, oh, I forgot that I agreed to follow up on that for you. So Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about webcams, since we're both sitting here on our webcam and we're learning to love our webcams here at RPI?
I do. Really quickly, back on the can you go back? Now I just lost my thought. Sending the minutes and the meeting, managing the meetings. It's also a great way to sort of micromanage, and that's an ugly word, but people might not be getting things done as quickly as you expect them, and you're not quite sure what they're working on because everybody's at home. So if goals are not being met or timeline isn't being met by specific people, I find scheduling more meetings, check-ins, because if they're the type that does a lot of work right before the check-in, so they can have an update to to the project, they'll at least get it done like 3 times a week if I do 3 check-ins with them. So, you really have to read your team. You might know them when they're in the office, but they could be totally different. It's difficult to shift to working from home. It takes a lot of discipline to be able to do that. And it's okay for you to put mechanisms in place to enforce the behavior that you're looking for. And so that's a little trick that I've come up with over the years to ensure that people are getting things done in a timely manner. It's not waiting for the next week to get that update and they're like, oh yeah, and you can tell they've done maybe 2 hours worth of work on it. So just kind of wanted to bring that up. Okay, so our webcams, when we went, we were supposed to be doing an SIT, system integrated test on site with one of our clients. And that first week, we found out the Friday before we were supposed to fly out that, everything's on lockdown. They're not expecting us to come out there. And so we let them know right off the bat, everybody needs to be in a webcam, turn it on. And we started at 7:30 that morning, right before we started testing, just kind of orienting ourselves. Some of that team may be on this call right now, and it drove. We all feel so comfortable on there now. We are on other calls, and we're bringing up our webcam, and other people aren't. And it's just like an expectation at the beginning, but then it becomes natural after you're doing this a lot. It makes it very easy to read the room, to understand if somebody's not talking and asking a question. I can always see on somebody's face when something didn't hit or the light bulb hasn't gone off, and I'm like, let me take a second and let me see and make sure that we, everybody's on the same page. Without it, and people will be like, I don't have a webcam. I don't like getting up early in the morning, getting dressed. They don't all, at this point, we're in workout clothes. It doesn't matter. Everybody's in the same place all around the world at this point, working from home. So get comfortable with that. And also, it goes toward building that trust with your team. I'm vulnerable enough to turn on my webcam at 7:30 a.m. with you. If you could return the favor for me. So, I'm not putting myself out there alone. And that's kind of what you're communicating when you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really didn't want to turn on the webcam. I've been working remotely for quite a while. I don't usually work on a webcam with my team. Mm-hmm. We do lots and lots of conference calls, but we don't usually go virtual in this capacity. And I have found that I actually really love it. And it's something that I plan to keep doing, especially on status calls and team meetings, because it really is the closest thing you can get to being in the room with people. It almost makes you feel like you're all together again. And I've found that it really increases connection and really drives the work forward in a way that just being on the conference line doesn't do. So I did want to add, not all laptops have a built-in webcam. Not all computers make it easy, but there are some workarounds out there. And Melissa, I know there's a few members of your team that are leveraging their smartphone, mm-hmm. right? They bought like a tripod mm-hmm. And are downloaded an app to connect their smartphone to their computer. So they're using that as a webcam. Right. And there's lots of options for it. There really are very few people who can't make a webcam work.
And then I shame them and I call them a catfish. I'm like, what are you catfishing me? You do. You have a webcam. Everybody does. So
yeah. So we really encourage that with your team. We thought we'd be remiss. We've talked a lot about just virtual projects in general, touched a little bit on quarantine, but like I showed you at the start of the presentation, even those of us who have been working remotely and working from home for a long time are finding that this world we're in right now is very different. I've worked from home for years, but only now am I also, full-time nanny to my 2-year-old and teacher to my first grader. Things just look really different. And so we have to have a little bit of a different approach with our projects as well. And the message is, it's not business as usual. Not only are a lot of us carrying additional responsibilities outside of what we would normally have during the workday, this is a very stressful time for a lot of people. And so I try with my project teams to really cultivate an environment of understanding. If somebody's kid comes busting into the room, I mean, that's life right now. And I encourage people, as we're going through testing, as we're going through the meeting, if you need to step away, if you have a situation, just go ahead, pause your webcam, get up, step away. This is the reality of what we're working in. And if people feel that they have that freedom, I'm finding that the work product on the other end is a lot better. They step away, they take care of things, and they come back rather than trying to just tough it out and be distracted and only able to give half their effort to the project. And Melissa, I know you're finding the same thing, right? You don't necessarily have a 2-year-old that you're chasing around.
You probably
as well,
heard the
but
dog barking earlier, but yeah, no, and that's it. I'll be on calls with people or myself, and it's like, oh, the groceries were delivered. The Amazon guy's at the door. I need to step away and grab that. This is reality of times these days. So, as Theresa said, that distraction, that half focus is, you don't want to have that. So building that agenda, saying, okay, 2 hours, so people can schedule their Amazon deliveries in that time. They can, attend it, but I know children will jump in whenever they want and embrace that. I've gotten to know a lot of my colleagues' kids because they come around and they want to say hi, and this is family at this point. You're in each other's homes, so I think the rules of what was professional before have loosened up a little bit. So we just need to be flexible enough to embrace it and get the best out of our teams that are trying to get work done in these projects.
Yeah. So I think we all know that things are going to be different. I'm really interested to see at the end of this COVID-19 pandemic, what the workforce looks like. I think we're going to see a lot of companies allowing remote work and work from home options a lot more than were there before. And we're moving into that reality, many of us, on projects that maybe weren't as virtual as they're about to be. And I hope that we've given you some helpful tools and some tips that will help you mind that gap with your project team and in your own lives as you're moving from the platform to the train, wherever that train is taking us. I'm hoping that we give you some things so that you're able to mind the gap and make it on safely.